Today, the Matrix network includes more than 33 million users. There are more than 76,000 deployments that we know of. So it means they can go from one Raspberry Pi under someone's bed all the way up to servers in a government or one of our public servers with 12 million users on it. And that's only the ones we know of, because people don't have to report to the rest of the network. They may be just running it into a closed network. There are thousands of projects building on top of Matrix today. And everything is on GitHub, of course, and there are thousands of contributors. And one of the most amusing stats we found when looking through it was the fact that there are projects in more than 27 programming languages built on top of Matrix. So we have a page on the matrix.org website where you can just select which language you want, and you can choose all the various projects. So it's very diverse and very vibrant ecosystem. In terms of how it works, basically, it lets you as a user pick the provider you like, the provider you trust. So the black dots on this diagram represent the servers where you are going to register your account and where the conversations you participate in are going to be stored. And the smaller, the green ones here, for example, are the clients, the apps. This is the logo of Element, which is the flagship app that we have been, as the core team, have been developing for Matrix. But you have other apps, and you can see a logo on the top right corner, which is an app called Beeper, which is built on top of Matrix. And all these Matrix apps are interoperable. They access the data on a given server, and you can use different apps to access the same data, very much like email. Matrix is also meant to be a kind of glue between all the networks. The point wasn't to create something new and ask everyone to migrate to it, but also link the existing islands, the existing silos together. So for example, here you can see in blue a bridge to Slack. And there are bridges to Slack and Teams and Telegram and WhatsApp and all sorts of different applications out there, which means that if you're a Slack user, you can talk to a Teams user if Matrix is deployed in the middle and both conversations are linked to Matrix. In terms of the ecosystem itself, that's how it looks like. So the core deliverable is the specification in the middle, which is handled by the Matrix.org Foundation. And the foundation also has the copyright for various open source implementations of the servers, of SDKs. And we just, as for-profit entities, for example, Element, just gets the client layer at the top of the SDK, a very thin layer at the top to customize it. But there are also all the purple bits of these diagrams, which are developed by completely independent members of the community. So that's what Elements look like, which is basically very similar to a Slack or a WhatsApp, but it's based on Matrix, so it's open source. I give you access to the 33 million users of the Matrix network, end-to-end encrypted, and has all the features you would expect from a modern chat platform. So you have the read receipts, you can get public chat rooms, private chat rooms, one-to-ones, voice and video callings, all these sort of things, which are by default into the current communication apps. And meanwhile, while we've been building this, well, communication has been exploding, especially in the last year. If you look at Teams, which has been growing by its number of daily active users, or Zoom going through the roof as well, it's becoming more and more, everyone is relying on online communication. And the awareness of the limits of centralization is also rising. So people are being more careful about privacy, using ad blockers. There have been a big number of data breaches which push people towards security, towards making sure that the provider they use for their data are actually secure. And of course, legislation has been evolving with the Digital Market Acts in Europe coming together. So it's going a bit up and down, and they're changing the scope, but the idea is very much to explode the silos and prevent the big corporations to keep the complete control over users' data. So whilst we started by mostly wanting to solve fragmentation and give the user the choice, the world is converging towards that, and we really see this need for data sovereignty and privacy. So what Matrix is bringing is becoming very topical to today's world. In terms of who is using Matrix today, there are thousands of organizations at different levels. It's very topical for governments, and I have a few slides around that on why this is the case. So the French government has deployed it across the board. The German armed force, the Bundeswehr as well. The schools in Germany as well, deploying it for half a million users deployment, and a lot of open source projects who want the ability to bridge to networks like IRC and want to use a system which is open source itself and open itself and reflects their beliefs, their way of thinking. And so these are a short list of people, and it's a mix of people who are using it for their own needs and people who are using it to build their own products, like Thales, for example, building their own Matrix solutions. Basically, Matrix have been very much learning from email, and the same way SMTP came after a while, merging together all the different existing standard, standard, I guess, networks, I guess is the better word, with Gmail at the top as a kind of flagship email application. Matrix is coming in, trying to bring together all the different proprietary protocols and all the different standards out there into one single network with flagship apps like Element at the top to drive usage. So I was talking about governments earlier, and Matrix is particularly relevant for cross-organization communication due to this decentralized nature. So if you imagine this as a kind of a virtual government, then each ministry will have their own deployments, and they might be as part of the internal network, or they might be separate into air-gapped network. And all these different entities have complete control over the deployment. They can apply the different level of security they want. Like, for example, in France, that's precisely what they've done. And the Ministry of Defense doesn't have the same antivirus as the Ministry of Culture, yet they still can talk to one another. And all of the users will then be registered to one given server, and they can access the app they want to get there. And you can also integrate with either third-party applications like the procurement, or bridge to external apps if you really want to. And then you can have a secure connection to the wider public Matrix network, or even another governmental deployment. Other use cases we've been seeing working really well are for education, because it brings security for the kids, the data ownership, especially in Germany. We have, I think there are 20 universities in Germany who are actually deploying Matrix because they have to keep the data of the students on premise. So it's complete data ownership, and then they can collaborate together, and all the universities are part of a big network. Then you can also add integrations like calendaring, etc., and you have the interop between the different schools. We've seen it work pretty well with emergency services use cases, because we do provide, Matrix has low bandwidth support, has peer-to-peer support, can work on mesh networks, and you can bridge it to different apps out there. So, for example, we have the Texas, I forgot, the Texas Department for Emergency Management Department, which have been playing with it for a while now. And healthcare as well, both because of the end-to-end encryption, extensible, so we can integrate with other standards, including FHIR, and the data ownership and extreme privacy around it. You can, the fact you can add video conferencing, etc., makes it really useful in terms of not just being chat, but being able to access to the next level. So looking at maybe, for example, the French government, the need they had was replace Telegram. The story is basically Emmanuel Macron coming to power and having the entire campaign run on Telegram and WhatsApp, to the point where the Ministry of Digital said, what? But we can't we can let our government be run over one Russian or one American app. We have to keep control of our communications. What can we do about that? So that's when they actually went and Googled, we want something which is decentralized and secure and open source. We really want open source. So that's when they found us, which means that they needed the self-hosting. And the idea is very much to expand it to the 5.5 million public servants that there are in France. Today, it's 60 servers deployed, 300,000 active users. It's a mix of on-premise and in their secure cloud. Some of the apps are built by themselves. Some of the other ones are accessible from the public app store. It's completely branded, and they have end-to-end encryption capable antivirus. And the idea to next step is very much to open it up to the rest of the population as well, so citizens can interact with the government. So this is how the app looks like. It's called CHAP, and it's pretty, very customized, as you can see, and has different levels of security depending on where things are deployed. Other case studies, we've been seeing the German Armed Force, they were looking for something self-hosted, flexible, open source, and it needed to work between humans and also between humans and machines. Then Mozilla deployed it as something, a collaboration app, which is user-friendly, but also open to integrate with the existing IRC network and works well with the rest of the community, and needing a lot of moderation tools. University of Innsbruck is modern alternative to email, where they can own the data. Wikimedia is more around unifying the different apps that their employees have been using. And the regional government in Germany was again a digital sovereign alternative to Microsoft Base. So it's basically replacing Teams by something they own and they can run themselves. So basically, the kind of vision we have is that in 10 years from now, everyone will communicate via Matrix, and it will replace the phone network and email. That's what we're trying to do by providing a very flexible, open network for everyone and bridging together all the existing networks. Thank you. I think there is a short time for questions later in the day, but I think now it's my turn to let the stage to Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. Let me just share my screen here. All right, excellent. So thanks so much for having me. My name is Liz Olson, and I'm going to talk to you about how my team is leveraging FHIR to address social determinants of health. Now, who am I? Well, my undergraduate background is in information technology, but these days I'm very much a full-time physician. But right now I'm about 3 weeks away from graduating from my emergency medicine residency, which has been a long pathway. Here in the US, you go to college, maybe do some extra classes, which I did do. Then you go to medical school, and then you go to residency. And then if you're like me, you're going to, hang on, my slide timer is covering my deck. Is this better? Sorry about that. Perfect. So with 3 weeks left in my residency, I've been doing a lot of self-indulgent reflection on how it is that I came to get here, and how that pathway makes me really proud of the work that we've been doing with PRAPARE. The thing is, I grew up poor, like capital P poor. Now, I do have some friends who are involved in global health, so I have to clarify this does not mean that I was involved in subsistence farming or anything to that extreme. But to read you a passage from my med school application essay, born to a single mother without a college degree and raised in a dingy one-bedroom apartment, I learned early on that toys and nice clothes were luxuries, which, like a furniture or a car, we could not afford. Childcare was expensive, so I entertained myself after school with library books and a tiny black and white television that my mother had scavenged from the apartment complex communal dumpster. That television would fall into disuse when the electricity would be cut off for months at a time. Pretty bleak, right? It's great, it gets worse. So in high school, my mom and I had a discussion where she conceded that the earnings that I had from my after school job, they had not been squirreled away for college application expenses. In fact, she was using them to supplement her unemployment benefits and pay the rent. But then a police officer came by, and it turns out that that was even not true, because he was delivering a eviction notice. So there it was, all my fears neatly condensed into a single piece of paper. I would say that we were always struggling, but you would definitely call that rock bottom. And the thing is, I'm not alone. In 2012, we had more than 46 million Americans who are living below the poverty line. And for reference, for a three-person household, that is $19,000 a year. And sometimes programs will require that is before tax, so surviving on even less than that. And who's the most vulnerable? Of course, it's children, innocent children who did not ask to be born into that situation and have no means of elevating themselves out of it. More than 14 million of them were living in poverty. And 73% of those children are children of color. And the odds are stacked against kids like us. I will say that, spoiler alert, obviously I made it out of it, and we'll talk about how I got there. But essentially what it came down to is I was being evicted into homelessness at 16. And so with a GPA of 1.6, I chose to drop out of high school and I became a waitress. And, I joke about it now, and it's funny in retrospect, but at the time it was really hard and I had a lot of shame because I was a bright person and I wanted to be high achieving, but I had so much things stacked against me. So after effectively couch surfing for about 6 months or so, I was able to save enough money to move into an apartment with a bunch of really terrible roommates. But hey, it was 4 walls and a roof, so can't complain. And by sheer coincidence, the mother of a friend of mine referred me to a call center job. And I got hired there shortly before I turned 18. And about a month later, they were bought out by a big multinational corporation. And that corporation actually had the golden ticket. They had tuition reimbursement. And so that's essentially how I made it out. Not because I was able to pull myself up by my bootstraps, because I got essentially what someone might consider to be a handout. And like I had mentioned, I had that 1.6 GPA. So I did slog my way through some community college classes and then worked my way up to UMass Lowell, where I was studying information technology. And while still working at the same company, I was now working in their IT department at the help desk. And they approached me as I was finishing up my degree saying, how about we pay for a master's? How about a master's in healthcare informatics? And I instead said, well, how about healthcare? And I actually conned them into paying for additional classes so I could pursue med school. I did my prereqs at Framingham State and Worcester State. And then after a couple of years of that, I managed to apply and get into medical school. And that was it. It's really easy. I went from GED to MD, and there was absolutely no struggle involved, and anyone can do it. And it's, easy as pie, except it not. What I went through, this doesn't scale. You can't replicate this. But I bring up this story because it's a great tale of all the different ways that your social determinants and your social situation really do affect your well-being and your health outcomes. We're talking about employment or lack thereof, income or minimal income at best, housing, which I struggled with, transportation, which we never had when I was growing up, access to higher education. And then when you think about community and social context, the way I survived for the first 6 months after being evicted is by staying with families of my friends. If I didn't have that social network, what would I have had to resort to? I don't know. And when it comes to healthcare, I can't say that I really ever had access to it. I never had health insurance. I was one of those kids that the only reason I got my vaccines is because they barred me from returning to class until I was able to show proof that I had them. Now, maybe there were programs for kids like me. We were low income, single family, clearly struggling. Maybe there was something that would have paid for my health insurance. But if there was, I certainly didn't know about it. My mom didn't know about it. Maybe there were programs that would have helped us with rental assistance because, typically it's easier just to pay for housing than it is to struggle to support people who are actually homeless and get us out of a trajectory where we can then be productive and rejoin society and yada, yada. And then as far as tuition goes, I didn't go get employed at that employer because I knew they had this great tuition reimbursement program. They didn't even have that when I started. I only chose it because it was within walking distance from the room that I was renting. It was pure coincidence. I found out years later after the fact that there actually are programs that will do tuition waivers for kids who have been declared officially homeless, whatever that means. And I'm sure there's a Byzantine process there that no one's able to navigate. So how many kids who are qualified for that will actually be able to take advantage of it? And this is the issue. This is what we're trying to address. because these programs do exist, but no one knows about them and no one's connecting the patients who need them to the resources that are available. To bring this all together, we're going to talk about PRAPARE. Now, PRAPARE predates us. We're not responsible for creating PRAPARE as a survey, but it is a scientifically derived, validated survey available in 26 different languages to screen for various aspects of social determinants of health to determine what kind of resources people are at risk of needing at the individual level and at what resources are needed more at a community level. What we did is we took this process, which is used across the country primarily through paper and pen processes, and we turned it into a mobile app with FHIR integration. So why is this important? From a purely utilitarian perspective, as a physician, one of the things that the healthcare system cares about the most is unfortunately money. And there are different payment systems that will actually pay you more depending on the complexity of the patient. So if you can demonstrate that you have a more complex social situation, that actually can help with your reimbursement. It's a perverse incentive, but it's why that information is useful to healthcare companies. But on a more human level, this is how we help target the care that's needed to the people who actually need it. From a provider perspective, we can then demonstrate that we are actually helping folks out of their terrible situations, helping to prevent future hospitalizations. And then we can advocate for change at the community and national levels. If we're not able to show that these resources are being used, how are we ever going to get additional funding to expand those programs? Again, just looking at some of the core measures that PRAPARE evaluates for ethnicity, housing status, education, employment, stress levels, and then also it goes so far as to talk about incarceration history, because that can be so stigmatizing and that can really be a challenge to overcome in terms of getting employment. But it also talks about your likelihood of being involved in other things that are going to kind of lead you astray, so to speak. And then there's also domestic violence, which is hugely under-recognized, especially within vulnerable populations. So in recognition of my team's work on this, we were able to submit this to the Administration for Community Living Social Care Referral Challenge. And we were one of, I think, 6 phase 1 awardees. There's 2 more phases we have to get through, so stay tuned. But that was just a really great recognition, I guess, to say that some organization out there wants what we have to offer and thinks it's important, and it was very validating. I just want to go over a couple of screenshots here so you can see kind of the semi-final product. Of course, we really care about accessibility in various different languages. And we wanted to make sure that we had a mobile interface that was easy to navigate and intuitive, especially by a touch screen. And of course, everything is opt-out, so any given individual can decide, I don't feel comfortable answering this question. And as you complete various questions, it kind of checks you off to follow your progress along until you're ready to submit. And then more on the admin side, this isn't something that the individual would be seeing. You can see here that you have access to upload it, either store it locally, put it on a Happy Store server, MyHIN, and we really have the flexibility on the back end to connect this to your FHIR server of choice. If it's not going to save. Bear with me. There we go. And this is why this is important. We're talking about 21 million children receiving free or low-cost school lunches. And I was not one of those kids. I was at the brink of homelessness for years before we finally fell off that cliff. And still, it was not something that was recognized, and I was not able to take advantage of any of these programs. So by doing the work that we're doing and just kind of smoothing out that gap, that's what we aim to do. So if there's anything that I want you to take away from this talk, it's that I want you to consider FHIR and its applications in this kind of quasi healthcare space, because this is not about measuring someone's blood pressure or tracking their growth curve. This is about trying to prevent disease before it happens and help wellness as a more holistic view. And the last thing I'll leave you with is a quote from my fellowship application essay. Unique as I may be as a physician, I'm also incredibly common, representing millions of children living in poverty and millions of adults living hand to mouth. I recognize that an individual physician may not have the power to make striking changes to the way that healthcare is delivered, but even just being empathetic to my patient's barrier to care will improve my ability to serve as an advocate. And I was right, an individual physician can't do this. It takes collaborative. And so I want to invite you to check out our team at firefly.dev. We are open source, we love collaborators, we have a Slack channel that anyone can join and just get involved, and we're happy to teach and learn from you. We also have educational videos available on YouTube. Thank you, Dr. Manning. And really, I can't thank Dr. Falkenberry and Dr. Manning enough. Without them, I wouldn't be where I am today in informatics. And with that, I will turn things over to Dave. Thank you so much for listening.
Wow. Welcome to the 4th DevDays Patient Innovator track. Yesterday morning, in introducing Chris Brancato's talk, if you didn't catch it, he spoke about how he nearly died because of a data transfer fail, despite his career in health IT and the fact that his 3 family members at his bedside were RNs. And the 2 talks we just heard were inspiring. I'm more speechless than I usually am because they gave me so much to think about. From Amandine, I heard just the whole idea of once the data starts to flow, and this has been our grand vision from the beginning, we can start to build things on top of it without being constrained by what the current data holders do. And anyway, I need to introduce Katie. Katie McCurdy, I think, will blow your mind, because while we're here building the infrastructure, the pipeline to move the data around, Katie is way, way, way out, a generation or 2 ahead of what will be possible to do with that data when it gets in the hands of the person, what I call the ultimate stakeholder, the person who has the need for which we're doing all of this. And without further ado, I'll hand it to her. Katie?
I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the nice intro, Dave. All right, so let me just jump in here. So yeah, my story starts about 10 years ago. I was living in New York City working as a user experience designer when I started having new unfamiliar symptoms that didn't seem to belong to my existing autoimmune diagnosis. And I found myself jumping around from doctor to doctor between holistic providers and specialists. And I just felt like no one was really seeing me, no one was really hearing me or seeing the big picture. And I bet many of you in the audience know someone who's been through some sort of mysterious health journey similar to mine. And it's actually fairly common. Every year in our country, there are 12 million people who have some sort of diagnostic problem, whether it's a misdiagnosis or a lack of diagnosis like I was experiencing. And I think one big reason for this is we just don't have enough time in our doctor visits. It's really not enough time for a patient to tell a complicated story or for their doctor to really take in and make sense of that story. So I mentioned at this moment in my life, I was working as a user experience designer, and I knew that meetings always went better when we can make them visual. So I decided to make a visual of my health history, and I started bringing that into doctor appointments, and especially the first appointment with a new doctor. I'm not going to dive into this one too much. This is the original kind of retro version from 10 years ago. But the important thing to know is this was a summary of my whole health history from birth up until today. And I found that it was a really effective way of helping my doctor understand where I had been and kind of at a glance, getting the big picture. And I heard from doctors really from the beginning that this is the coolest thing ever, and that it really helped them absorb my story. And it also helped me remember what to say in those doctor appointments. So, you know, I kept using my own personal timeline. And then 3 years ago, I started Pictal Health to help other people like me with rare, complicated, or mysterious health issues to tell their health stories in a more visual way. And really the point here is all around doctor-patient collaboration, helping patients feel heard and understood while they're trying to get the right diagnosis and treatment. And so far I've worked with 56 individual patient clients through a very intensive one-on-one process where I interview them, listen to their story, help them to synthesize it and write it all out. Then I map it out visually. And currently this is a very manual process, which I'm working on automating. And then I prep them to use these visuals and documents in their next doctor appointment. So I would love to share some examples with you so you can understand a bit more of what I'm talking about. So let me break this down a little bit. What you're seeing at the top are symptom graphs. And so these purple graphs are someone's symptom history. And it's not that they were tracking carefully since the 90s, all their symptoms over time. This is really their memory of how their body felt and how their symptoms felt over time, with higher being worse and lower being better. Below that, you see diagnoses. So the blue bubbles are diagnoses. It's not on this example, but frequently these also include kind of standard health data like surgeries and procedures, test results, some of that kind of typical stuff, but that's not as interesting for this presentation. And then the yellow bubbles are life events, and how big the bubble is how stressful it was or how big of a deal it was for this person. And so you can see this particular person had some pretty major life stressors. And then below that are treatments. And these are not only prescribed treatments, but things like dietary changes or saunas or really any intervention they've tried to try and feel better. So all in all, this gives a nice holistic view of where someone has been, what they've tried. And we also start to see patterns like how moving to a moldy house or having the death of a child seem to worsen this person's symptoms. And the example I just showed you is very simple. This is like a very zoomed out screenshot of a much more complex timeline. And that's actually more typical of the complex patients I work with, who may have, 10, 20, 40 diagnoses and 80 different treatments they've tried. So this can get super complex. And in addition to timelines, I've been mapping out symptoms on the shape of a body to help show the quality and distribution of symptoms to help patients really communicate better about how they're feeling, especially with so many people experiencing invisible symptoms like I had. So I've had positive feedback from both doctors and patients. Doctors have said this helps to jumpstart the conversation and that it's what they're trying to do in their head when talking with patients. And then patients have said that this has helped to expedite the diagnostic process and that it helps them to feel heard and seen in a new way and also improves the feeling of collaboration with their doctor. So what I really want to emphasize in this presentation is what data can really only come from the patient. So we talked about symptom history. A lot of our health history is from way back in childhood, before the time we had electronic health records. When I was a kid, my records were on paper, and I know they were pretty much all thrown away by now. So that symptom history, how we were feeling over time, especially when we go way back in time, it really doesn't exist anywhere, or at least in a structured way or a comprehensive way. So this is best gotten from the patient. And when we talk about symptom history, it's not only physical symptoms. We also want to remember that mental health is a really important part of our history. Of the people I've worked with, probably 95% have wanted to map out mental health alongside physical health. These two ideas are often held in kind of different systems. So by bringing them together, we can really have some enlightenment about the intersection between our mental and physical health. I mentioned symptom quality, how our bodies feel, especially if our symptoms are invisible, which is the case for so many people with autoimmune, rare conditions, Lyme, even post-COVID. People aren't believed and they're not taken seriously. So mapping out symptoms and bringing to life the quality of the pain, is it a sharp or dull or prickly feeling? This can really help communicate very succinctly to doctors how someone is feeling and also help them get taken more seriously. Stress and life events. So these yellow bubbles, again, are kind of life events, and the size is stress. We know that stress is so vital and important to our health, to our physical health and our mental health, but it's just not a concept that's very well captured and well structured in our health records. And when we map out stress alongside health, we start to see some of these correlations, like this person's parents were divorced and her low-grade depression started right then. And so stress is just a really important concept to include in our health histories. And the patient is the best person, obviously, to provide that context. I talked a little bit about treatments, and not only medical treatments, but other things the patient might have tried. And I've also been working with people to color code their treatments so that they could start to communicate whether that treatment worked or didn't work, or they're not quite sure. And I've heard from doctors that this is really helpful to understand what the patient has tried and whether or not it might have helped and what issues they might have had with it. So of all the people I've worked with, I would say for the most part, we have gotten, again, I'll guess like 98% of the data from their memory. And that might be surprising to you. We haven't really needed to refer to health records or to the patient portal very often, with the exception of those hard to remember medication names. And so, you know, I've been surprised, and I think you would be surprised by how much people remember, how reliable they are. They're very reliable narrators about the milestones and, you know, about their history. So, you know, one thing I hope I've convinced you of is we can't expect to just aggregate someone's whole story through pulling their health data from various sources, because that data just doesn't exist. Things like historical data from when we were, some of us were kids, symptom history, and, you know, both mental and physical symptom history, along with the quality of our symptoms, how our bodies feel. There's the stressful life events, or life events and associated stress levels, I should say. Non-prescribed treatments and whether or not those treatments actually worked for the person, not to mention correction of data errors, which is like a whole other talk. But the patient is really the best person to provide all the context and to provide the correct and kind of holistic story. And in my opinion, showing that story visually is the best way for a patient to communicate it and for others to take it in and understand it. So what's next for Pictal Health? I've been working, as I mentioned, on a way of automating this process, which has been quite manual up till today. And I am seeking collaborators and partners to potentially work together to scale this and bring it out to many more people. So please contact me if you're interested. And I would love to hear from you either way if you have thoughts about any of this. And I do have a meet and greet at, I think, 3 p.m. today, Eastern time. Thank you so much.
Hello. Well, thank you, Katie. Yes. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I do have a meet and greet later today. And also we will be seeing each other again later during the closing session. But for now, it's the start of a whole new day of FHIR tutorials. And I'll see you again. Enjoy your day. And I'll see you again at 4:15 when we start the closing session. See you later. Bye-bye.